So welcome to this vCenter server post deployment module. In this module, I would like to take a few minutes and discuss the vCenter server interface. We'll go through the settings for creating a data center object, and also we would add a host to our infrastructure or to our vCenter server. So let's get started with this. Before I actually log in to the vCenter server interface, I want us to just take a look at the different services that are installed when we install the vCenter server on Windows. For my lab environment here, I'm running the vCenter server on Windows. So I have a remote desktop connection here to our vCenter server. So let's take a quick view at those services. If you go tools here under services, way down at the bottom, you should be able to see these listed down here. Okay, so starting from here. So there are quite a few here. Ideally, what you would want to do is just to make a note of the status and the startup type for the main ones, just in case you find that something go wrong in your environment and you're trying to connect back to your server and you're having some problems. You could come in and look at this first. The main one here I want us to take a look at is the vCenter, the VirtualCenter server service. So this is currently running and the startup type is automatic. A couple others would be the inventory service. Where is that? Oh, here it is. The inventory service, and you have your license service. The server for our web client, you have that there. Your certificate service. These are just a couple that the more important ones you need to keep an eye out for. Okay. So now that we cover this, let's log into our vCenter server. Let me just bring that browser. Okay. We'll talk a bit about name resolution in a little bit, but we did spoke a bit about this previously, but we'll get back to that. But for now, we'll log into our vCenter server. I created a record in on our DNS server for this. So we'll go ahead and just log into this. So we'll use our username of administrator at the vSphere.local. Get our password in there. I mean, for your testing or your lab environment, you could either run the Windows-based or the vCenter server appliance. It's just a matter of preference. Because we would have looked previously that the interface for them are basically the same. So it's just giving us a warning that we have expired license in our inventory. We're running the trial here, so you don't need to worry too much about that. So this is an infrastructure I already had set up for some other work I was doing. So if you notice, we have a couple things different here, like your data protection appliance is already integrated into this. But we would go through all of these back in our monitoring and troubleshooting and in our data protection and replication courses. Okay. So on our home screen here, once we log in, we have our inventory section, we have our monitoring section and administration. A few of these here I would have added from some previous testing I was doing. So like replication, vSphere replication, VDP, did some work on the operations manager. So on a fresh install, you would not see these here. So let's go through the interface for this. Over on the left here, we have our navigator. So the navigator on the left, this area really presents us with our inventory selection tools, where we would be selecting our options for configuration. So we have that on the left. In the center here, this area, we'll call this the content area. This shows the content configuration for options which we would have selected on the left in the navigation menu. Over to the right, we would have our alarms and work in progress. Okay, so our alarms isn't listed currently here. If we go under, if we click this little arrow here, drop down, if we do layout settings, we could select the alarm there. Okay, so that would add our alarm section in the corner here. So let's just close that out to get some more space. Okay, so at the bottom here, we have our recent tasks. So this area would show us our recently worked on tasks or our currently running tasks. So we would see those here as we're progressing. New in vSphere 6.0, what we could do is we could move around these. You could drag stuff around. If you want this at the bottom, you could put that there. You could really customize this as much as you want. You could move that over at the side. Okay. If you totally mess this up, then you could always just come back here and just reset the factory default. Okay. So let's just do that really fast. Okay, this should just take a second to load back here. Okay. Okay, so now that we have our freshly installed vCenter server in place, what you would do is you would go ahead and create a Datacenter object. After we create the Datacenter object, we would go ahead and then add our host to that environment. So the process basically of adding a host to our vCenter server, that automatically install an agent on the ESXi host. The vCenter server then communicates with that agent. So before we could do anything in this infrastructure, we would first need to create your Datacenter object. So that's basically the root object on our vCenter server. So basically we could have multiple Datacenter objects to one vCenter server. Okay, so once we create our Datacenter object, then we will be ready to add our host. So in our environment here, if we come down, let's just view our inventory. This is our vCenter server. If you were to click on this here, you would have a couple options here. Okay, we could add a new data center from the list at the bottom. So we could go ahead here. Let's just take a look at the summary. Okay, so this is the total capacity of the host that we have in this infrastructure so far. Don't worry about this. We would go ahead and add additional hosts. We'll go through the process of creating a data center. So we'll do all of that. So let's just get started back with this. So if we were to right click our vCenter server here, we have the option of creating a new data center. So we could go ahead and, as I mentioned, we could create multiple data center per vCenter server. So we already have a data center 1. Let's just create data center 2. Okay. So if we go over to our navigation menu here, our inventory list, if we click on the data center, you'll see that we're presented with 2. This is one I already had in the infrastructure, and this is the one we just created. Okay, so under the data center, then we could add our host, create clusters, and those other stuff there. But for now, what I want to do is just speak a little bit about name resolution for our infrastructure. So Before we go ahead and add our host to our infrastructure, we need good forward and reverse lookup for our ESXi and our vCenter server. So basically, you would want your host name to resolve from ESXi host to ESXi host. Secondly, you would want your ESXi host to resolve to the vCenter server. And finally, you would want your vCenter server to be able to resolve host name for different ESXi hosts. Okay, so on our DNS server, let me see if I could pull that up really fast here. Okay, let me see if I could get the DNS. So we see we already established our records in here. So you'll manually go ahead and create your records for your vCenter server and for your host in here. Okay. Okay, so let's get back to this. So let's go through the process of adding a host into our infrastructure. We'll add it to Datacenter 1. If you go to the bottom here, there are multiple ways of getting to this too. You could just right click here, add host. You could come here, add a host. Multiple ways of doing this. So let's just go here then. And here you would either enter your IP address or the host name. So in our case, we will try to bring in ESXi 5 into this infrastructure. Let me just double check on this. Just bear with me a little bit. Let me just double check. Okay, good. So we're going to bring in ESXi 5 into this infrastructure. So ESXi 5. So, and here you see the location listed as Datacenter 1. That's because we would have right clicked on Datacenter 1. If we did on 2, it would have showed up as 2 there. So we hit next there. So this is our account on our ESXi host. So we need to authenticate over on that host. So the default username there is root, and our password. This would have been the password we configured when we set up this host. Okay. So it's asking to verify this. We have a security alert to verify the SHA-1 thumbprint over on the ESXi host. Just to verify we are connecting to that particular host, we could just check on that. So it should give you some information here. Okay, so this starts with our thumbprint here starts with 4.1 and ends with 7.0. Okay, so let's go over to our host and just double check on that we're indeed connecting to ESXi 5. So let me just pull that up now. Okay, so we are at ESXi 5 here at the DCUI. Let me just log into this. Okay, where we would find that information is if we come all the way at the bottom here to view support information. If you look over on the right here, so our SHA-1 thumbprint, it starts with 4.1 here, ends with 7.0. So we confirm that we're actually connecting to this box. Let me just minimize this. So we'll just go ahead and click yes. So it's validated. Okay. So we have some basic info on this. It tells us the virtual machine that this particular host is running currently. This was from our testing previously. So it shows us the platform, and in this case we are running the ESXi host virtually. The version of the ESXi is running. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hit next. So here we could assign our license keys. It shows us here we have 59 days remaining on our evaluation. we could go ahead and assign license keys here. We paste in our license keys and hit next, but for now we're not going to do that. Okay. If you notice just now when I clicked on that, it just pushed this over to the work in progress on the right here. So if we are working on this little arrows at the corner here, if we were to hit this while it's running through it on a wizard, this would just minimize that, and we could continue working on something else and always come back to it. If you just click back on that, it would expand that out. Okay, so let's just hit next on this. Okay, so we have a couple options here for lockdown mode. So we could either disable our lockdown mode. We could set it to normal, where we could only access this through the vCenter server, this host through the vCenter server. Or we could do a strict lockdown mode where we would only be able to access this through the vCenter server and the DCUI would be disabled. Okay, so for now we just want to leave this disable and just hit next. So we'll go ahead and leave that as a default in Datacenter 1. Hit next here. Then we have a little summary of what it's going to do. And we'll just go ahead and click finish there. You notice that the task is running on the bottom here. So you have some previous tasks that we did, like creation of our data center, and some of the current tasks like adding the host now, those would be displayed here. This will just take a few seconds and then we will see the host listed in our inventory or our navigator view there. Sometimes too, what we'll need to do is just hit refresh here. Okay, just to refresh the interface. Okay, so this is taking a few seconds. Okay, so this is now completed. Our host has been added to our infrastructure. If you notice at the bottom here, we have our ESXi 5 listed now. Okay, if we click on the drop down, we'll see our one VM that we have running on that. So on our navigation menu here, there are a couple things I'd like us to take a note of. So this view here, it's basically divided into 4 views. So we are currently in the host and cluster view. That's this current view. If we click next here, this will bring us to our VMs and templates view. Basically, this is where we'll work with our VMs and templates. Then we have our storage view. So we have a couple data stores, but we'll talk about data stores in a little bit. Once we add that host into our infrastructure, the data store would be listed here. Okay, I think this is the current data store. Yes. So we could just go ahead and rename this. Let's just do that really fast. So let's rename this so we'll know that this is the local data store. So this is the ESXi 2. Sorry. Okay. We'll have a separate session with working on data stores and those other things. But for now, I just wanted to mark that out as belonging to ESXi 5. Okay, so our next view here is our networking view. So host and cluster, VMs and templates, our data store view, our storage view, sorry. And then here we have our networking view. If we expand this out, this would just give us a little idea of the networking that we're running on this host. sorry, this ESXi server. I just want us now to take a couple minutes and go through some of the settings for our hosts. Some basic settings. We won't go into much detail in this for now. So if we click our ESXi host and well, getting started page, the only option you have here is to create a virtual machine. Here we have our summary page. This would give us some information on our CPU capacity and usage, our memory capacity and usage, and our storage capacity and usage. These are some of the information we would have seen before. This ESXi box is running virtually. That's a type there, the platform. We'll see our processor that we currently running, our logical processors, our NICs, and our VM, which in this case is this one VM. The state and the uptime for this, you will see those information listed out here too. If we come under the monitoring tab, we have a couple things here. Issues would be listed here. If we had alarms with triggers configured on them, which we would cover in our monitoring course. But for now, I'll just go through this really fast. If we had alarms and they were triggered, you would see that showing up here. We would have some performance information listed down here. CPU, memory management, this, the time range for this. We could set this to real time, for example. We could make a couple different configuration changes to the view here. For now, we will just move on because we'll have a separate course just to deal with these things. Our log browser, we could retrieve our logs from here. Some of the tasks that we would have run, events would be listed here. Our hardware status, those would be listed here. And this would pull basically from the sensors that we have on our hardware. But in this case, we won't have much information from that because we're running the ESXi host virtually here. So you'll take a look at the sensors, alerts, and warnings, system event logs. All of that would pull here. This is where we'll deal with our resource reservation. We'll talk extensively on this later. For now, we'll just go through this. Utilization for this. Okay, so let's just get back to our Manage tab. So under the Manage tab, we have a couple different things here. We could assign license over on the right here. Let's start from the top, coming downwards. Okay. Here we will see our virtual machine startup and shutdown type. Our startup with the ESXi host. The configuration for that, we could do that in here. So basically, we could go edit. We want our VM to start up automatically with the host. We could configure that here. We could set a delay of how many seconds you want that to delay before starting up. Our VM agent is basically if you're running some sort of firewall or gateway that you need to be up and running in your infrastructure before your other VM comes up, you would configure those in here. Our swap file location, we could configure that here. The VM compatibility, this would be dealing with the compatibility for our VM hardware. We could configure that in this area here to edit and then select that. For licensing, this is under systems. We could assign a license here. Let's just recall, this is for the particular ESXi host and not the vCenter as a whole. Okay, that we're viewing currently. We could go ahead and set our time configurations. And we would have seen this in the traditional or the desktop vSphere client. We did some config on this previously, so we could go ahead and modify these configurations in here. List your NTP servers. You could configure those sort of stuff in there. Authentication. This is if you're pulling your ESXi, your users and groups directly. ESXi would be pulling those from your Active Directory. So you need to join this here. And this is different than if we're configuring identity sources on the actual vCenter server. So let's just bear that in mind. Certificate management, we could do that in this option. Power management, in this case, this would deal with our DPM power configurations. So we could go ahead and do that there. Or advanced system settings, generally you wouldn't need to make much changes in here, but it's just an option. You could enable your hyper-threading on your CPU and those sort of stuff from this screen. Or resource reservation, we could configure or view that in the screen. Security profile, we did spoke about this previously. Firewall setting or services, we could work with those here. Recall we dealt with those under the traditional vSphere client, and now you could configure that in here. Your lockdown mode, those are the stuff you could configure in the screen. You just hit edit, and then we could enable or disable whatever services or ports we need. This is our host cache or swapping. We'll talk about this a bit later. Host profiles, if we need to extract a host profile or add one here, we could attach a host profile onto this host. A host profile, basically, as I mentioned previously, is a configuration file with all of the config on a particular host. Hardware, we have some information here on processor, model, processor speed, socket. Those are the information we pull here. BIOS version. You'd have a lot more useful information on this if you're running on actual physical hardware. And because we are running on a testing platform here and virtualizing our ESXi host, it wouldn't be too valuable, these information that we're viewing. For memory, we'll have some basic information on that. Graphics, the adapter, we'd have some info on that. Power management here. This would be power management for the actual ESXi host. This would be a bit different from DPM, the one that was listed earlier. Okay, so you could set that here. And this is our flash resources. You could add your SSD, you add capacity here, and management of that, we could enable that. Once we add here, then we could deal with that here. We could go in a particular VM and change our caching settings and stuff after we would have added some capacity here. Okay, so one more thing I want to cover before we finish off with this module. I want to take a look at the different settings for the actual vCenter server. So we'll do that next. So let's go across there. Before we move across to the settings for our actual vCenter server, let's just take a look quickly here. In our next module, we'll discuss the networking setup, and then we'll follow through with storage and so. But I just wanted you guys to have an idea where these settings are. So we are under our ESXi 5 here. Then we are under manage, then settings. This is where we were. You would go to networking. This is networking for this particular host. This is our vSwitch with our different port groups, our physical adapter. We'll get into all the details of these in a little bit. Across here, you would have storage, your different storage adapters, and then detail for your adapters. Okay, so these are listed out here. We have our storage devices, our host cache configurations. We'll deal with all of this in our storage section. Alarm definition, tagging. We'll deal with tagging too in a different course. Okay, so it's basically this is where these other settings are located for the host. So let's get to our inventory list again. If we come to our vCenter server and then come down in our list and click our actual vCenter server here. Okay, so this is basically like how we were looking at the host just now. So you had a getting started page. We had the option of creating a virtual machine there. In this case here, we could have the option of creating folder, creating a data center, but we'll talk about folders in a little bit. Folders basically is just a way of organizing our infrastructure. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's just cover the settings for our vCenter server. Some basic summary info on this. Monitoring, if we had replication going on, which we'll cover in our replication course. This is where you'll monitor those. So we'll get back to that though. The main thing I wanted to show you guys was the managed settings for some of the config in here. Okay, bear in mind we have a separate course, the monitoring course, that would cover all of this in detail. But for now, you could configure your statistics settings or user directory. If you go and edit there, we could deal with setting up our mail or SNMP receivers, runtime settings. We could set that there. Okay, our database sizing and connection, we could configure that in there. Login settings, the different options for login, we could configure that there. Timeout setting, basically we could configure this in here too. Just give us some info on ports that we're using. Okay, so we'll get to all of these in the monitoring course though. So just to have an idea, you have your general and your licensing. We just spoke about licensing under the host settings. That's different. This is the license for the actual vCenter server as a whole, or the vCenter infrastructure. So we could add our license here. We could create a message of the day, similar to if you're logging into like a Cisco device. You could create a message here so your different administrators that log into this, if you want a display message to pop up there, they could see that once they're logged in. Okay, our advanced vCenter server config, you could configure from there. Our auto deploy configuration, we would have seen this screen previously too. So this service is currently not running, but this is where you'll come to view your auto deploy stuff. Here we have our syslog collector that's built in with the vCenter server. Okay, so I have one configure here, login for my ESXi1.